I want to say good afternoon to everyone. I'm Kenneth F. Wille from KOW Building Consultants. Going to be talking to you for about an hour, maybe a little less here, from 1 to 2 here in New York. We're not going to take questions during the presentation, the webinar, but if you put in the chat after, if we have time, we'll answer them. We have a lot to get through. I don't know if we'll have much time for questions, but we'll certainly try to at the end there. Coming to you from our Midtown Manhattan office, a nice rainy day. Hopefully we're getting out of winter. A couple tips, actually, if you're coming out of winter with your buildings or your homes. One is check your skylights. You might have no drainage problems with horizontal water, which is rain, but vertical water is different, which is snow and could be an ice shield back up into a flashing or a skylight. So check that if you've had a lot of snow like we've had here recently. And the other thing is when you have frozen pipes due to the expansion of water, you have really two times it could be an issue. Number one is if your frozen pipe is so substantial that it actually bursts the pipe, and you're going to know you have a problem. The second would be frozen water ice in pipes that don't burst it but cause leaks. And we'll get calls sometimes when it's warmer and people say, hey, why do I have a leak today? It's 60 degrees. We'll say, because it's 60 degrees. You had a frozen pipe and it held it in place until it thawed, until it turned to water, and the ice was acting as a plug, now allows the leak to show. So a couple of things coming out of winter here as we dive into our construction inspection topic. So understanding the construction loan monitoring process from closing to ribbon cutting. So what are we talking about here? What is the goal of this? What are the goals of what we're talking about? So when we're talking about the construction loan monitoring, we're talking about the inspection that occurs to review and opine on a requisition by KOW for hard money lending, tax credit syndicators, etc. It's the construction loan monitoring phase. I'll also tell you as a little tip or a little behind the curtain view, we at KOW call it a site observation report. We're going to get into why it's an observation, not an inspection, in a few moments. But I will caution you, we're all going to be changing. Well, we're going to be changing as a company, and I believe a lot of us will be changing the name to a CPR, Construction Progress Report. And the reason that I believe that's going to happen, and the reason I believe that's going to become the new standard, is because I am with others on a committee right now, and we're writing a guideline for the folks at ASTM, who you know from your property condition standard and your ESA standard. And there's going to be a standard soon, a guideline actually, not a standard, for doing a requisition inspection report. And we've settled on calling it a construction progress report. I know there's a bit of irony there. It's called a CPR, but it's a CPR. So we're all soon going to be probably calling it that. I think that would be a good thing. I like that kind of consistency across the industry. I think that's good for everyone. So just one thing to keep an eye out for. If you hear a CPR, construction progress report, that may become the new nomenclature. So what is the goal when we're monitoring the construction loan phase of the project? Okay, well, first of all, we want to identify any issues or potential issues. Those are two similar but very different things. And as we do our inspection, and again, I'm going to say inspection for ease, but it's technically not. As we do our inspection or observation, we're going to identify issues or what we think may be issues. I have a whole nother webinar I do about early warning signs of a problem project, and that's one of the reasons that we provide value. We all can tell if the house is on fire, yeah, but we can also tell you if there's gasoline stored near dried wood and the person who inhabits that likes to light a lot of candles. That's a potential issue, or it's an issue, but it's a potential fire. So we want to identify issues. We want to identify potential issues from the ground breaking all the way through to completion. We want to reduce the risk and protect our client. It's all about risk. I like to say to new inspectors and new employees that we hire, I say, if you get a loan for a car, a house, a jet ski, and you don't pay your bills, someone comes knocking on the door to take it. That's a repossession. In one other world, do you show someone a hole in the ground and say, loan me $100 million? Trust me, It's a very risky endeavor we live in here, and that's okay. It's just good to recognize risk. I like to say you can bet on the Jets winning the Super Bowl next year. That's your money to waste, and that's fine. But you better be getting a commensurate payout to your risk. I would call that a very risky bet. So we want to reduce the risk. We want to protect our client and look for anything that could be a problem. We want to monitor the asset or the liability. We want to monitor the project. How's it going? What's the latest? Any new issues with the construction, the quality, the safety, the neighbors, the building department? We want to monitor how it's going. We want to help the underwriting succeed. However you underwrote this, however this was assessed, we want that to be a success. Again, we don't mind risk, we just don't like surprises. I remember back in the early parts of my career, if you brought someone at a traditional, bricks and mortar bank, a brownfield, they didn't even want to take the call because we knew there's a lot of money in the cleanup. Well, fast forward now a few decades later, and now those sites are very attractive. Why is that? Because we've figured out as an industry how to quantify the cleanup. And because of that, we can assess the risk properly. That's why we work for very smart people in our clients, because they don't mind risk, they just don't like surprises. And that environmental piece has now been a proven track record of value for soils removal. Where is it going to go? What did the testing say? So we can assess that risk properly. The bottom line, though, through this entire process is the following. If the borrower defaults, if the GC defaults, if there's a big issue on the project, let's say the GC gets thrown in jail overnight out of nowhere. Let's say the borrower has problems with the government and flies to a tropical island never to be seen again. Let's say the worst case scenario happens. Can the bank complete the project with the remaining funds? You might think that the most important value in our funding report is the funding number. No, that's the second most important number. The most important number is the remaining funds. We have to look at it as worst case scenario. If we brought in a new contractor tomorrow, could they finish the project for the remaining funds? Now, that's a little bit naive, because if the contractor gets thrown off the job by the owner, it probably is a messy divorce. We probably didn't get the best quality from their subs the last few months. If it was a money flow issue, we probably have some issues with schedule and quality of installation. So I'm not naive. It's not perfect. But once you get that project back up and running, can we finish it with the remaining funds? This doesn't happen very often. We had a project a few years ago. It's happening. I won't give you any details because it doesn't matter for the teaching of the illustration of the story. But the contractor was such a problem that they were thrown off the job. A new contractor came in, and the new contractor that came in put their best super on it. And he said at the meeting with everyone, you have to give me 30 days. I don't want one phone call from any of you. You're not coming to the site. Give me 30 days. I want to walk every square foot of the site. I want to meet with every sub. I want to talk to every supplier. I want to walk everything with the building department, with the fire department, etc. Now that cost us. That was a collective cost, that 30 days of time and effort. But then once satisfied, once ready, it moved back on track, and the remaining funds were there after that transition cost. So what's the process? Well, when we do a requisition inspection, the goal is to attend the owner, architect, contractor meeting if there is one. There's no legal statute that says you must have them. Some municipalities, if it's a state agency or city, will require it. Some don't. Some projects will have no meetings. Some it's weekly. Some it's twice a month. Some once a month. So it's all over the map. I will say one thing that I think has been a positive coming out of a negative of COVID, and that is the following. Before COVID, an OAC meeting was a very physical, in-person thing. It was in a trailer. It was on a construction site. Usually you would do your walk first, and then you'd grab a coffee, use the restroom, and you'd sit down and you'd go through the requisition and the project together at a table, live, face-to-face. Then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, that all went remote. It went to Teams, it went to Zoom, etc. It went to, what was that other one? Anyway, it went to remote. Coming out of that, what's actually happened is a lot of projects have stayed with Teams or Zoom. And I think that's a good thing. And I'll tell you why. We have to do an inspection no matter what. And if our client joins us, wonderful. But we have to go no matter what. There's no getting around, we're going to do the inspection. But the reason I like it to still be Teams and Zoom is the following. We can have a client who is monitoring a project or hiring us to monitor a project, and they're located 4 states away, and they're concerned about this project. I'll say, hop on the OAC call. Just feel how the project's going. Not just the information, but the tone, kind of the body language of who seems to be frustrated, who seems to be doing a good job, who seems to be missing things, who seems to have more on their plate than they should. So I love the fact that I could have a client that's across the country that will say, I can't get on a plane and see you tomorrow, but I'll be on the meeting. And I love that. I think that's such an opportunity that is there, and maybe it's just problem projects, but I think it's very, very valuable. And remember, we're only there a few hours every month. If we're on a construction project 2 hours a month and it's open 9 to 5 Monday to Friday and half day Saturday, we're there 1% of the time. That's it. A lot happens between those site visits. So we like to be on site and see how people are interacting. We like to read body language of, wow, the architect really seems to be behind with responding to RFIs, or wow, the contractors, that's the third failed inspection from the building department they've had. We need to talk about that. That's a trend that we don't like to see. So that's why we are on site reading that. But the OAC remote still gives you some good value, I believe. Remember, this is an observation, not an inspection. What's the difference? I'll tell you. An inspection is required to get you to move from one phase of the project to another. I'll give you a good example. Let's say you're going to pour your concrete foundation walls, and your formwork's done, and your rebar is done, and your workers are there, and you've got a concrete truck or 2 or 3 at the curb, and they're spinning. But you're waiting for the building department to show up and approve of the rebar and the foundation walls. That's an inspection. Because until that inspector shows up and says, okay, your foundation rebar is approved, you can't pour that concrete. That's not us. That's a very real part of the job. But where we live is in the observation. We go typically monthly in line with the requisition. So it is very possible, and actually very common, we could show up on March 4th, and they're just finishing framing of the 4th floor. We show up on April 4th, and all the sheetrock's installed in the walls. We never saw the copper, BX, the HVAC, the fire caulking, the insulation, any of that. Someone did. Who? The inspector. Someone inspected that wet wall. Someone inspected the insulation and the fire caulking and gave the thumbs up to install the sheetrock. So inspections occur all the time on projects. It's just not our role in so much as we're looking at the requisition for payment. Typically, the contractor will set the percentages, and the architect signs an agreement when we're all in agreement. That's called the pencil rec. It's not usually a pencil now. I remember the days. I got some snow on the roof of my head here. I've been doing this a while. When it was a pencil rec, and it was literally, we had pencils out or pens out, and we were marking it up in the field, and then they would correct it and send a clean copy. The owner approval is separate, though. If you look at the G702 3, which we will in a moment, it does not have a signature for the owner. It has a signature for the contractor and the architect. We're there as a bank representative or a lending institution if it's a tax credit deal, and a monitoring role, and we do not sign the application for payment. Most projects have line items that will draw down in line with overall completion. For example, they say windows are 50% done. We look at the front and one side, and it's a box building, and the windows are installed. That's a good number. Some are pari passu or on equal footing. They draw down in line with overall completion. So general conditions, profit, overhead. So for example, if you're 18% done, you get 18% of your profit. 22%, you get 22%. It's not perfect, but it's certainly a fair way to keep the money flowing commensurate to the overall completion. And then our report includes the requested amounts and our recommendation. What do we do if there's an issue? Well, there's levels to that. The best case scenario is we discuss it and it's solved at the meeting. We have one contractor, we've done a number of projects in New York City, and he would always have a couple workers following us on an inspection. And if someone pointed something that was a quick fix, by the time you turned around and came back down that corridor, that unit, it was already fixed. We like those problems. Those are the best. They're solved immediately. We can also mention it in a report. If it's serious enough, we'll send an email. If it's a little more serious, we'll call and say, hey, did you see our email? Take a look at the report. We're worried. If it's very, very serious, we'll say to our client, we need to get everyone on the phone here. We need to get a meeting to go over this. And then our nuclear option is recommend no funding. That's very, very, very rare. It's happened once in the last 28 years. And it was literally, we have a very good inspector. She said she did everything on the site she could. She had code questions. She had quality questions. She had issues with the waterproofing. The architect was non-respondent. Our client was non-respondent. The GC was non-respondent. And when it got to the balcony railings, and she said, there's no way that's an approved attachment system for a balcony of a high rise, we had to go to recommending no funding. So it's very, very rare. And usually, issues can be solved well before that. What do we produce? Well, you get a report, and we like to say that there's a summary page at the beginning, and the report is 30 seconds versus 30 minutes. If you have 30 minutes, please read on. You have the whole report to look at, and you could go through the schedule and the photo log and everything in the report. If you only have 30 seconds, the first page or two is the most highlighted data points, including any critical issues. So we've done that for the client, responding to the world we live in, where clients have said, look, I don't always have time to go through your reports. Can you summarize the most important thing? Actually, I recommended it in the middle of a seminar years ago. I said, would you be interested if we summarize everything in the first page or two? And she said, oh, that would be great. So that's why we do that. That's just, that's the reaction to what I believe is the usability of the report. The other thing is, the narrative style of our report has been replaced with a tabular format. I think that's pretty common throughout our industry and throughout our world, right? We really kind of whittle it down. And we try to tell our inspectors as we're writing our reports, simple, simple, simple. I would have said one simple, but I wanted to get the point across. You have to reach your reader. And most of our readers, most of our clients, many of them, they're very busy, they have big portfolios, and they unfortunately don't have the luxury of going out in the field to see the construction site. So we really need to make it as clear and concise as possible. We tell you when we went, weather conditions, which again, that may impact the schedule. If you're going to call us and say, hey, why didn't they pour the second slab for concrete, and we see it's 8 below, or it's freezing or it's raining. Okay, now we know. So the weather and conditions are key. Typically in areas that have harder weather, like the Northeast or the Northwest, etc., basically the northern part of our country, you really have 3 considerations which are very different during the winter. Very different. You have temperature, you have moisture, and you have wind. And they affect you differently. Temperature is going to affect things that are water-based, like concrete, caulking, painting, etc. Your precipitation, that's going to affect when you're able to install things like a roof. And then wind is going to affect things like siding, bulkhead work, scaffolding. So they're very different, but they're all very impactful to construction projects. I also think this is a collective we've gotten a little lazy with worrying about the winter because the last few winters have been pretty kind. Not so this winter. So you watch, I guarantee you, schedules that start coming out soon that are going to have winter concrete, they're going to start building in winter delays. People got away from that the last few years. Human nature. A few nice, snowy, easy winters, and we all of a sudden getting a little cocky until you get a winter like this one. So we give you our funding recommendation, change orders, pending change orders, potential change orders, contingency, who is at the meeting, retainage, store materials. Then we have a body with our completed work issues, defects, permits. We talk about the schedule and the appendix. Okay, so we work at recommending in line with the request, in line with work in place. What if there's forecasting? And a good example would be, we go to a site today, today's Thursday, and I say to the super, hey, I see you're looking for the 4th floor concrete. That's not poured yet. And they say, no, they're coming tomorrow. That's going to be, 20 trucks or whatever it might be. That's a big ticket item. I'd like to get paid for that, please. Because by the time this goes through, that will be installed, the trucks will be gone, and I want to pay them. We'll say, okay, we'll let you know. We're going to talk to our client about that. In our opinion, there's 4 ways to handle that. They want a forecasted request. Answer number 1 is no, it's not allowed. Answer number 2 is yes, it's allowed. Answer number 3 is yes, it's allowed, and we'll be back next week, but that's another fee. And answer number 4, which is most common, yes, it's allowed. We will not issue our report until the super sends us photos, and actually we like video as well, but photos showing that big ticket item is now installed. I'll say 2 other items with that. 1 is when we're in the area, we'll probably go by anyway. And 2 is we'll then take a good look at it the next month. But that 4th answer seems to be the most common. I think it's reasonable. And for a big ticket item, we want to make that money flow because we want that concrete sub to say, we'll see you in a week for the 5th floor. Not, well, you haven't paid us. We're going to go across town where we were paid. So work in place is really what we're looking at with a couple of asterisks of forecasting, if reasonable. What about non-work in place? Okay, so we really break everything into 2 categories: work in place, non-work in place. Work in place would be, you can see it, touch it, feel it, it's there. Concrete's installed, windows are there, paintings, door hardware, a boiler's set, roofing is installed, work in place. That's on us. That's on the KOW inspector's expertise to opine on completion, quality, plans and code, and recommendation for funding. Work in place is on us, full stop. Non-work in place is a risk question, and we're going to have a discussion with our client about that. That would be deposits, off-site store materials, engineering, calculations, submittals. So there's a lot of factors with that. So we're going to have a discussion about that. I will say that I've noticed that our clients will react to that based on how the market is. Yes, I said it. So when things are moving and busy like now, a lot of non-working places are approved. I guarantee you, if we hit a recession, all of a sudden that becomes a no-go, except for a couple of exceptions like elevator and specialty items. So we'll have that discussion with our client about the non-work in place. The other thing I would say is if it's an off-site store material, we can always reserve the right to visit. It's up to our client, but it's something that's a discussion we have with you. I will caution you, we have not seen a huge uptick over the last year for deposits due to tariffs. However, we've gotten more volatile over the last 2 months than I thought we would with the tariffs. So keep an eye on that. You might start to see some more deposits, and it'll be this following language, which, boy, do we hear a lot of this coming out of COVID. I need to give a deposit to this sub because I need to lock in pricing. You may start to hear more of that. And I'm not saying that's wrong, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but we heard a ton of that coming out of COVID. I need to lock in pricing. So if that's the case, you might see an uptick in deposit requests due to the current tariff and construction cost environment. Work in place is us, non-work in place is a risk question. On-site stored materials would seem better than off-site. They can be, but on-site can be damaged. There could be theft. There's other issues there. Very often, we'll also call something working stock. Working stock is material that's ongoing, being installed, the sub is mobilized, and we expect it to be in with 30 days. Some clients can allow us to call that work in place, some do not. but that's kind of what we call working stock. We like working stock a lot because it tells you the sub is there, they're working, and they have material to keep working. We really, really like that. We really like to see, if we're talking all about windows, and now all of a sudden the window installer's there and there's a lot of windows there, assuming they're safe from being broken, we love that because it means when you come back in a week, 2 weeks, and a month, there's going to be further work in place. So how is the requisition handled? How is it formatted? Well, there's various formats. The most common is the American Institute of Architects G702 G703. I'm going to show you now the document itself, and I'm going to demystify what I think can come across as a little bit of a confusing looking document. It is going to be signed by the contractor and architect, and the goal of what we do and the goal of this document is to hold the contractor accountable for no more money than they're due, but to keep the cash flowing as it's applicable, as it's warranted. Because like I said before, we want the plumber leaving on Friday and saying, see you Monday, not I'm pulling our workers off, our materials, our gang box, and our equipment, and we're going across town to a project that is paying us. Because now if there's a callback for that sub, that's going to delay you. I promise you it'll delay you. Because even in the best terms, they're going to say, well, I'm over across town now. We'll be done here in 2 months. We'll see you then. So we want to keep cash flowing as long as it's accountable. And owner's equity or the owner directly paying for things could help. But that's how we want the money to flow as it's work in place. So let's take a look at the G702 and G703. I think it's kind of an intimidating document at first glance because there's a ton going on here. Let me break down what you're looking at. And I made up an example one here. I called it Awesome Apartments. So let's just look at what we're looking at. This is the AIA G702. Now, the American Institute of Architects sells a lot of their documents. It makes a nice scratch from that. And in their G series is their 702. You're looking at it. We're going to see the 703 in a moment. The 702 is the summary page, also called the signature page. But when you look at this document, this is the breakdown. In the top left is who and what. Who's doing this? What's the project? Who's the contractor? Who's the architect? Top left, who and what. That never changes. Once they fill that in for the entire project, that's your who and what. Box 2, top right, current request. This is request number 2 through 12/31. So this would be work in place through 12/31. Top right is the current request. That'll change every time. It should go 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. If they revise it, sometimes they'll do 2R. But basically, once you hit 1, you should go through numerically until the end. Top right, current request. Over in the middle left, change orders. That entire box is a change order summary. It's basically summarizing your change orders. Now, not every project uses this and populates this, but that is what it's there for. For our example, I made a change order 1 for $1 million. Over the middle right, that's the request. We're going to drill down on that in a moment, but that's your current request. Then you have the general contractor signs and it's notarized. And remember, it's the notary that notarizes for the general contractor, not the architect. That's good for a couple reasons. The biggest one for us, to be selfish, is it tells us it's not a draft. It tells us it's the actual application that the GC is submitting to the bank for payment, and it's the agreed upon numbers that they went to the trouble of having notarized. So that tells us it's their official notary. When we look at a pencil copy is not signed. A signed and notarized tells us this is the official document. And then lastly, the architect's certificate for payment. This is actually a very powerful line. Not only does the architect certify that the work should be paid, but they're saying that the project and the work in place is in accordance with the contract documents. That's a critical statement. It's not just complete. It's in accordance with contract documents to the best of their ability. So that's a powerful statement. Does an architect have to sign every project? No, depends on their role. Most projects, the architect, or better named design professional, because it could be a professional engineer. Most cases, the architect will sign this throughout the project. When don't they? I'll give you a heads up. It's when you have a project that an owner is the contractor. So if you have one entity essentially that is the owner and the contractor, they often don't have the architect sign this because they don't need to police themselves via the architect's signature. They save the money. They don't need them to do this. We're not a big fan of that. We like the architect involved in signing this. Nobody knows the design as intimately as the architect, full stop. So we like that they're involved. When they're not involved, it's a risk piece and it's noted in our plan review. I will say, however, if you have a project that is a owner contractor project, they're often very good quality projects because they're building it themselves. I'm not going to say a contractor's main goal is to get in there and screw the developer. I'm not saying that. But when you build it yourself, you're going to own this. This is your building, your facility, your project. So usually the quality is very good. Usually there's even some extras and things because they're building it themselves. But that's an instance where you don't see the architect approving. All right, well, how is the G703 set up? I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the 703. If you can understand one line here, you're done. You got it. Just rinse and repeat. I have 5 line items here in a change order line item. You could have 20, you could have 50, you could have 385. If you understand one, you're good. So it basically has, in this case, let's use concrete. It has concrete, which is going to be $2 million total. $1 million was completed before today. $1 million was completed in this period. None is stored. $2 million total, 100% done. Balance to finish 0. And retainage I did is 100,000 in this case, which was 10%. Oh, I did over this period. Anyway, so let's stay with concrete. So in this case, we have concrete's a $2 million value. We completed $1 million before today. We completed $1 million today. It's $2 million or 100% done. This project, for the purposes of this illustration, was going to cost $9 million. There's a $1 million change order now. It's $10 million. And currently we're at 50% done, as you can see. Because if you can follow one line item, you can follow all of them. Okay, so this is what you'd have from the G703, which is your detailed pages. And again, the only link between your G703 and your G702 is your change order here and your total. Everything else just builds up to those totals. So how does this look on the G702? This is how it looks. So this, if you notice, there's the $9 million plus the $1 million change order, $10 million total, and $5 million completed. I like to break this down into pieces as well. Here are the categories of the G702. The first 3 line items is cost. It has nothing to do with completion. It has nothing to do with you're on month 0 or your ribbon cutting. It's the cost of the project. In our case here, it was going to cost $9 million, $1 million in change orders. Now it's 10. That's cost, period. You don't need anything further. That's the cost of the project. Okay, well, how am I doing so far? This is how you're doing so far. This is completion. 5 million completion. That one line has your completion. Then you have what I call adjustments, which is your retainage. You could have owner's equity worked in here. I kept it out for the moment. Adjustments would be your total retainage, which gets backed out of your total completed store to date. So if you're following along, we had 5 million complete, 250,000 in retainage, 4.75 is due. Total earned less retainage, but not so fast. If this isn't month 1, we paid something already. Your next phase here is already paid. And then the delta would be payment due. So they're due 4.75. They were paid 1.9. They're due 2.85 today. And then you have the balance to finish with retainage. I'll point out a key thing here too. If you notice, we have 5 million complete of 10 million, which means we have 5 million remaining. Why is this more? And the reason this is more is because this adds in retainage. This gives you a cushion in adding in retainage. And I'm going to go over that in detail in a moment. But just to summarize this again, you start with cost, completion, adjustment. What were they paid before today? What do they do today? And what's left in funds? Now, I mentioned $1 million in change orders. How do we view change orders? How does that work? Well, first of all, typically hard cost contingency will be there for the general contractor. That will be a hard cost contingency in the general contract for the contractor. That will be for unforeseen conditions. 5%, 10%. Should be higher for renovations as well. Some of our clients have 5% new, 10% renovation. That's a good idea. And the reason it should be higher for renovations is your renovation is a lesser number, meaning the percentage will yield a lesser dollar value. And in a renovation, there's things you're not doing. Whereas in a new construction, you're doing everything. So we like to see 10% for renovations and definitely a lighter moderate renovation, but 5% for new may be okay. The other thing is you need to ask yourself, which is what we do when we do a plan review, what is that percentage based on? If I have a project that has a big environmental cleanup and they have a huge environmental dollar value and they've got subcontracts to back it up, I feel really good that we're not going to need the change orders like we would if we're all wondering what that's going to cost. So what your percentage is based on is key here. And when we look at our budgets, we consider that. Change orders should be fully signed by the owner, by the architect, and the contractor, not us, not the lending institution, not the owner's rep, unless they're acting as a clerk of the works for the owner. So we ask of the project, are the change orders reasonable? Are they adequate? We don't sign change orders, but we do approve of the funding. So to us, it's about, is this unforeseen scope needed? And is this proposed change order reasonable? Now, was it the contractor error? Was it designer error? Who pays? We'll get to that. But our look at this from a risk standpoint is two things. Is this thing needed? Yes. Is the proposed change order reasonable in scope and cost? Yes. Then we have to do it. The project has to do it. Who's responsible? We'll get to that. That's kind of separate from the change order. If you have a project that there's a real world example, the plumber put the wrong size pipe in the underslab piping for the drainage because they used the wrong old plans. After the concrete was installed, they had to rip it all up. Number one, is this unforeseen scope needed? Yeah. They put 3 inch, you need 4 inch. This is needed. Number two, is the proposed change order reasonable? Yes. It seemed like a good price, time, and materials for the work. Now, on a side conversation, that's the plumber's fault. You're going to go after them and their retainage. But at the end of the day, that comes after, does the change order need to happen for the risk of the project to be lessened so that the work can be accomplished? And I'll also point out here, we look at potential change orders and pending change orders. And they're two sides of the same coin. And I'll tell you how we look at it. A potential change order is the following. I like nice examples. We show up to a site and the super says, hey, bad news, we're a corner building. We're going to bring our electric entry, our point of entry for electric off the front. We have to meet with the electric company next week. We may have to bring it off the side, which means we have to move the electric room, and that's going to be a change order. We didn't know this was coming. The electric company changed their mind, and we're meeting with them next week. We don't know if it's going to happen, but we're meeting them next week. And we say, okay, what do you think that's going to cost? And let's just say, for argument's sake, they say $200,000. Okay, that's a potential change order. Now we come out next month. Hey, how did it go with the electric company? Bad news. We have to move the point of entry. That's now a pending change order. It's coming. And if we don't have it yet, fully signed, negotiated, and scheduled, it's coming. No doubt, it's now a pending change order. So we look at both of those. We like potentials to not become change orders, but they go through that maturation from being a potential to a pending. Now, there could also be a soft cost contingency or a separate developer's contingency. But generally speaking, we're looking at the hard cost contingency. And I'll also tell you, One of the things we've seen over the last year, not every project, but a number of them, is they're adding another contingency called a tariff contingency. We like that because if you can prove the subcontractor has based their numbers on a certain material price, and you can prove later that it went up to another material price, it's an easy paper trail to justify that change order or not, meaning they're not going to be able to get it if it was not an actual increase. So we have seen some projects come in, they'd have a general contractor's contingency and a tariff contingency. I would also warn you, based on what's happened a few times over the last number of years, if gasoline goes up and what's happening kind of in the geopolitical sphere with Iran and all, and Venezuela, but certainly Iran, if gasoline goes up, you may start to see subs put numbers in and have a little asterisk at the bottom. This happened the last gasoline spike was about 5 years ago or so, I think. I don't know. All the years just meld together in my brain now. About 5 years ago, there's a gasoline spike, and we saw a lot of subs put pricing with an asterisk that said, if the national gasoline price is above X, we reserve the right to upcharge this amount. So they built in a little insurance layer for themselves. You may start to see that again. It's something we're going to keep an eye on. It may be coming. Haven't seen it yet, but if history serves, when gasoline goes up considerably fast, that happens. Now, all this talk about change orders, what does that mean against a GMP or stip sum? Well, this is how we view a GMP and a stip sum. Again, we're not attorneys, we're not accountants. We're just mere construction inspectors, engineers, and building inspectors. So, to our viewpoint, stipulated sum is pretty simple. There's an amount stipulated or stated that's going to be the cost of the building. So, if I'm building your building and we have a stip sum, I say to you, I will build this building for $60 million. If I'm good at my job and it costs me $58 million, because I have good relationships with my subs and I'm good at what I do, it still costs you $60 million. If I'm not so good and it costs me $64 million, it still costs you $60 million. That's it. That's your floor. That's your ceiling. End of story. Now, change orders are not included in that discussion. Because if it's a change order that's a true unforeseen condition, you wouldn't ask me to cover that cost where I didn't know I had to cover the cost. So if I call you after a month and I'm your contractor and I say, hey, bad news, I hit a tank, I have to remove the oil tank. Nobody told me there's an oil tank, and there's no record of an oil tank. But I had to call my company in to properly remove the oil tank. That's $100,000. That's coming above and beyond the stipulated sum. So the stipulated sum is the $60 million in my case. If I have a change order for $100,000, that's in addition. And in our stip sum project, it's going to be a closed book. And this is a critical point. I would say to you as the contractor, hey, you're going to get my G702 and 3 each month. You're going to get my partial lien waiver, and you're going to get my change orders. But what I do with my subs is my business. You're not going to see the subs requisitions and in the application package each month. It's one of the things we struggle with, and one of the things we mention on our projects that is a risk. I'm not saying that the contractor is doing anything wrong, but it doesn't give us their backup other than their paperwork themselves. Now, what could that look like? Take a GMP, guaranteed maximum price. Let's say the same project, but a GMP. I'm saying to you as your contractor, I would build this building for you for $60 million. If I can bring it in and it's $64 million, it still costs you $60 million. But if I bring it in for 58, we split that $2 million between contractor and owner. That's a guaranteed maximum price. In that project, it's an open book. Now you do see all of the subs requisitions, the subcontracts, etc. So it's similar but different from a stip sum. A stip sub works well when it's a known product, like affordable housing. A GMP is a better fit when it's not as much of a known project, like a condo building, where they may be changing finishes and layouts and unit mix as the project is going on, or if it's something that's not a known scope of work. So that's why you would use one against the other. Now, this contingency for change orders is not a guarantee. It's for unforeseen conditions, the majority being foundation issues. You probably got 60% of your projects in New York City, you have change orders or foundation issues. That's ground up. It can also be used later on in the project for upgrades, owner upgrades, if it's available. And again, that's a much better conversation to have if they want to upgrade flooring when they're 70% done, 60% done, 50% done, when they're 5% done. I'll also give you one other thing to keep an eye on, and that's value engineering. What is value engineering? VE. You hear some project, oh, we're saving on VE. It's the process of reducing a cost without reducing its quality or effectiveness. They're engineering in value. I'll give you a bad example and a good example. Bad example. Hey, Ken, we saved $200,000 in the budget. I said, that's great. How? Well, at the elevator waiting areas, instead of doing ceramic tile floor, we're going to do vinyl. Okay, well, that's not as good. Well, you didn't listen to me. I said we're saving $200,000. I said, I heard you, but it's not as good a flooring. You've devalued the quality of that flooring. So I'm not going to say it's worth it or not worth it, but don't sell me as the same quality if you're devaluing the quality to save money. That's an example of value engineering. Another example, we had a ground up project in the Bronx, and I think they had 36 cameras in the budget for the security system. They wanted to have on camera all the corridors, the lobby, parking areas, the site areas, basically everything outside the apartments. I think it was 36 cameras. And they smartly, really smartly did the following. When the structure was built and the framing was done, they had the camera company come in with a device they have and actually go everywhere they plan to put cameras. And they said, you don't need 36 cameras, you need 28, because we were able to use several cameras to get overlap and take some cameras, in this case 8, out of the quantity, and therefore their price went down. That's value engineering. That's a really good example of value engineering. Not always available, but that was a smart way to do it, where the company said, look, we could save you some money because on the plans, we didn't know how many cameras we would need. Turns out we overemphasized, you're going to save some money. That was a good value engineering piece without a reduction in the quality. How about retainage? How does that work? All right, well, the retainage is applied to the monthly application for payment, and it's used as like an insurance layer for the developer, the owner. It starts at 10%, could be 5%. Some states have dictation on what it can or must be. And then it reduces down to 0 at the end of the project. Great example is it's a callback. It's an insurance layer. You have retainage on subs, and then your GC has retainage. So a good example would be we had a project where the framer was done and said, we'd like all of our retainage released, please. And the GC said, no, I'm going to hold it for a couple more months. And the framer was not happy. Well, as it turns out, the plumber came in, started doing all the wet walls in the bathrooms, and said, you have a problem. Your framer used an old set of plans, and on one of the apartment lines, one of the walls moved 6 inches due to the trash room on the other side, and the framing was done on the old plans. They had to come in and move that one wall in one apartment on each floor 6 inches. Not a huge deal, but certainly not a 0 deal. Guess what? If there was no retainage on that framer, that would have been a harder callback probably. And they came back, they fixed it. Then when everything was signed off, all the framing was accepted, everything was done, it was fully released. So that's a good example of why a retainage is used. From a GC standpoint, it's used as well, like we talked about earlier, and it gives you that cushion just like that framer, but the overall project. One thing I'd caution you is sometimes we'll have projects where deposits will not have retainage held. That gets a little dicey. I understand why it wouldn't. If you have a company that says, look, you're going to turn the machines on and make this stuff, you need to give me $1 million, and it's a big project, okay, they want $1 million. They don't want 900,000 or 950. I understand that. But then it gets a little harder to track later when it comes to work in place and assessing the overall completion. So it's something to look for, something to keep an eye on in the language of the contracts. The other thing is that some line items don't have retainage, like bond, insurance, permits. Those are usually requested upfront, requisition 1, sometimes even requisition 0, which is basically your closing, 100% payment for bond, insurance, and permits, no retainage. Not unreasonable, very real world. We track these. We track the reductions, we track the releases, and then we hopefully get final waivers of lien from the subs as well as from the GC. Okay, how do we report on this? Well, we put all this together. We have completed work with an emphasis on work this period. We typically break it by trade, plumbing, masonry, concrete. That may not be the case if it's a project that has, let's say, various buildings. If we feel it's easier to write a report a certain way, it's easier for you to read a certain way. So let's say you have a 15-house cul-de-sac and a community building. We may not say concrete, masonry, windows, and doors. We may say 10 Elm Street, 12 Elm Street, 14 Elm Street, because that's a lot better for you to assess risk in us reporting what's completed based on the layout of that project. So we will deviate from this. It's what fits the project best to have the most effective way for us to describe to you, our reader, what's in place, what's ongoing, what's not yet done. We'll also talk about general conditions, and just a quick general conditions definition. Just remember it this way. General conditions are construction costs you have to spend money on that you don't see at the end of the project. You see windows, you see concrete, you see kitchen cabinets. You don't see a portable toilet. You don't see a site trailer. You don't see construction fencing. All the things you have to pay money on, they're physical construction costs, but you don't see them in the end project. They support the end product. That is a general condition. We talk about construction defects, workforce, and its adequacy. We give you our assessment if we feel it's going as it reasonably should for the project, considering its scale and its point in the construction phase. We talk about permits. We won't recommend work that should be permitted that's not yet permitted. We document what we've received and reviewed, submittal logs, other logs, meeting minutes, controlled inspections. We talk about violations, stop work orders, utilities, and any other issues. And then the final piece to our report is the schedule. And by the way, if you're scoring at home, it's actually kind of interesting. I've probably seen 20 of our competitors' reports, and so many of them, including KOW, follow certain things that were set in the 1973 Manufacturers Hanover memo that one person sent to another that said, hey, if you're going to get a draw inspection done, have your inspector follow this format. And still to this day, those pieces in that memo you still see. One of them is the schedules last. Anytime you see a report where the schedule's talked about last, that came right from the Manufacturers Hanover. If you see a report that has the G702 and then a column for the consultant, that came right from the Manufacturers Hanover memo. So I find that interesting. It's this many years later, and you still see kind of the fingerprints. So how do we look at a schedule? Well, first of all, schedules could be anywhere from, actually, they could be anywhere from verbal or one page all the way up to a professional company. It depends. There's projects that have different sophistications. Number one, we look at milestones. We really like milestones. Foundation's done. We're breathing a big sigh of relief. Probably the biggest sigh of relief of all. Foundation's done. We're now working in air. Oh, that's great. Superstructure's done. Really good. Very happy. Well, let's have a top out party because that's a really, really good moment for the project. Okay, we're weatherproof. Okay, we can now work inside. We can put salamanders in there, bring in heat. We can rock and roll inside with lots of stuff like rough framing. Now rough framing's done. Oh, that's good. Rough MEP's done. Okay, now we're really cooking. Closing up walls and ceilings and punch list. So milestones are very key for us because they're really good indicators of where we're moving from one phase to another. And the critical path format is the recommended schedule. I'll give you a quick education on what critical path is if you don't know. The critical path is the longest period of time that's needed for project completion that you must go through in the right sequence. So a perfect example is this. You have a bathroom and you have a kitchen, and you decide to get both renovated. And you hire Bathrooms R Us to do your bathroom, and they're going to take 1 month. 2 months demo, 2 weeks demo, 2 weeks new install, 1 month. And your kitchen company, Kitchens XYZ, they're going to take 2 months. 1 month demo and 1 month construction. So your bathroom's 1 month and your kitchen's 2 months. And you start them on the same day. Your kitchen is your critical path. And if you need to prove it to yourself, this is how you prove it. If your bathroom person calls and says, hey, bad news, that specialty bidet and toilet you wanted, that package, it's going to delay me a week. I'm not going to be done in 4 weeks now. I'm going to be done in 5. You're like, that's fine. You're not sweating it because you didn't move back in because your kitchen's not done. Your bathroom would have a 4-week float because that's the difference between the bathroom schedule and your kitchen, which is your critical path. However, if your kitchen company calls and says, hey, bad news, that specialty sink you wanted is going to delay me a week, you're now delayed. You're now not getting in 8 weeks, it's 9 weeks. So your critical path is your longest period of time in sequence to get to completion. Now, when you start a project, your foundation and your superstructure are your critical path because you're building your building. Once you build your building, once you build your structure, now you have many paths going on the same time, one or more, and by the way, there could be a tie, one or more are your critical paths. The most common are long lead items, facade, HVAC, utilities, because it's outside your control, and then the big one, elevator. Why is elevator a critical path? Because work backwards. In order for your elevator sub to show up on site and work, they need a waterproof structure with proper electric, which means you need to build that for them. And until you do that, you can't remove your construction hoist, which means your construction hoist has apartments open to the elements. So your hoist run apartments are tied to the critical path schedule of your elevator. That's all in the same sequencing, meaning one thing relies on another. They're predecessors. So your elevator is often a critical path because it affects your hoist and therefore your hoist run apartments. Have we seen buildings that have gotten certificate of occupancies excluding the hoist run apartments? Yes, we have. Yes, you can do that. And if you have issues with that critical path, that's one way to handle it. We'll also talk about previous delays, potential delays, a 30-day look ahead, and then the recent progress and pace. This is a representation of an S-curve, which is a typical industry curve to show new construction. You start slow, quote unquote slow. You don't have a lot of subs working. You're doing foundation, doing concrete, doing underground plumbing, etc. Now your building's built. That middle part, you're humming along. You got plumbers in there, HVAC, fire caulking, framers, flooring, windows, doors. Everyone's working. You're rocking and rolling through the middle part of the project. Now you get toward the end, it slows down, starts getting complete. Less gets done each month. So it represents an S-curve. So that's one way to track how the overall project is going versus the application, which is in this case, the green line. And then in the report, we include the photo log, the application, the lien waivers, any logs, the schedule, and clients can, of course, customize. They want to have us include certain items or not, or they're your discretion. If you want to include those or not, we review them regardless. So I think we're just about 2 o'clock. We might have time for a question or two, but I don't know much other than that. I want to thank everyone very much for attending. I hope this was helpful. We do have another webinar coming up soon. We have a few more. Please attend if you feel it will be helpful. Share it with anyone you like. It's just a chance to get in front of folks and talk about what we know. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Again, thank you very much for attending. I hope this was helpful. KOWBC.com if you need anything, and check your pipes. Make sure you don't have leaks. Thank you.